The sun was slowly sinking behind the dusty hills of the frontier town of Willow Creek, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. A long steam train hissed loudly as it slowed near the small wooden station, its wheels grinding against the iron rails. Travelers stepped down onto the wooden platform carrying trunks, bags, and hopes of new beginnings. But among the passengers who stepped off that evening was a woman who carried more pain than hope. Her name was Emily Carter. Her dress was worn from travel, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped an old brown suitcase. In her other hand she held a cloth bundle that carried everything she had left in the world. She stepped down carefully and looked around the unfamiliar town, her tired eyes scanning faces that passed her without notice. The conductor shouted final instructions while townsfolk gathered their belongings and disappeared into the dusty streets. Within minutes the platform that had been crowded became strangely quiet. Emily remained standing there, unsure where to go. The station master watched her from the doorway with mild curiosity. Travelers usually had someone waiting for them. A husband, a brother, a wagon driver, or at least a friend. But no one came for Emily. She stood alone beside the train as the engine released one last burst of steam before beginning its journey again. When the train finally pulled away, the sound of its whistle echoed across the valley, leaving Emily in an uneasy silence. She swallowed nervously and adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. She had traveled for 2 days after hearing rumors that Willow Creek might have work for a seamstress or housekeeper. It had been her last hope after the farm she once lived on was lost to debt. The man she had once trusted had abandoned her months earlier, leaving her with nothing but unpaid bills and whispers from neighbors who no longer wished to help. Coming here had been her final chance to start again. Unfortunately, the town of Willow Creek was not known for welcoming strangers easily. As Emily walked slowly along the wooden platform toward the station building, she could feel the curious eyes of the few remaining townspeople watching her. Some whispered quietly to each other. Others simply looked away as though her presence made them uncomfortable. Life in the frontier had taught people to be cautious. Strangers often meant trouble. Emily stepped inside the station where a small iron stove glowed in the corner. The station master looked up from his desk and cleared his throat. "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" he asked. Emily hesitated before answering. "No, sir. I was hoping there might be work in town. I heard Willow Creek might need help." The man studied her for a moment before shaking his head slowly. "Winter's coming. Folks already got their help. Not much opportunity for newcomers." His words landed heavily in her chest. Emily forced a polite nod and stepped back outside. The sky had grown darker, and the wind had started to carry the cold scent of evening through the valley. She sat down on a wooden bench, unsure what to do next. For a moment she considered climbing back onto the next train out of town, but she didn't have enough money left for another ticket. A short distance away stood a tall cowboy wearing a weathered hat and a long brown coat. His name was Daniel Hayes. He had come to the station that evening with his twin daughters, Clara and Lucy, to collect a shipment of supplies for his small ranch outside town. The girls, both 6 years old, stood quietly beside him holding hands while watching the train depart. Daniel had lived in Willow Creek most of his life. The townspeople respected him as a hard-working rancher and a man of few words. But behind his calm exterior lived a man who had experienced deep loss. 2 years earlier, his wife had died from a sudden illness, leaving him to raise his daughters alone on the remote ranch. Daniel noticed the woman sitting alone on the bench. Something about the way she held her suitcase tightly against her chest caught his attention. She looked exhausted, as though the road behind her had been far longer than the train journey itself. The twins also noticed her. "Papa," Lucy whispered softly, tugging his sleeve. "Why is that lady sitting there all by herself?" Daniel looked down at his daughters before glancing back toward the bench. "Maybe she's waiting for someone," he replied quietly. But even as he said it, he suspected that wasn't true. The girls continued watching Emily with innocent curiosity. Children often noticed things adults ignored. After a moment Clara spoke again. "She looks sad." Daniel remained silent, but he couldn't deny the truth in his daughter's words. The woman did look sad. In fact, she looked like someone who had reached the end of a long and difficult road. Meanwhile Emily sat motionless on the bench as the last light of sunset faded from the sky. She tried to gather the courage to stand and search for a boarding house, but fear crept into her thoughts. What if no one would rent her a room? What if the town refused to hire her? She had nowhere else to go. A gust of wind swept across the platform, causing the twins to shiver slightly. Daniel knelt down and wrapped their coats tighter around them. When he stood again, he found himself looking toward the woman once more. Something deep inside him stirred, a quiet voice reminding him of the loneliness he himself had felt after losing his wife. He remembered the long nights on the ranch when the house felt too quiet and the girls cried for their mother. Without fully thinking about it, Daniel began walking toward the bench. Emily noticed the sound of approaching boots and looked up nervously. The tall cowboy stopped a few steps away, his hat casting a shadow across his face. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "Evening, ma'am," he said gently. Emily nodded politely. "Good evening." Daniel glanced at the suitcase beside her before speaking again. "You new to Willow Creek?" "Yes," she replied softly. "I arrived on the train today." Daniel shifted his weight slightly. "Got family here?" Emily hesitated before answering. "No." The cowboy understood more from that single word than she realized. He looked back toward his daughters, who were watching the conversation from a short distance away. Then, almost quietly enough to be carried away by the wind, Daniel said something unexpected. "My twins. They've been needing someone around the house." Emily looked up in confusion. Daniel continued carefully, his voice low but sincere. "They lost their mother 2 years ago. Ranch life keeps me busy. Hard to manage everything alone." The twins slowly walked closer, their small boots tapping against the wooden boards of the platform. They looked up at Emily with curious eyes. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he spoke the words that would change all of their lives. "My girls need a mother." Emily's heart skipped as she stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. The evening wind carried the distant whistle of the departing train across the valley. And in that quiet moment at Willow Creek Station, the beginning of a story neither of them expected had just begun. The night air at Willow Creek Station had grown colder, and the golden light of sunset had slowly faded into deep blue twilight. Emily Carter still sat on the wooden bench, trying to understand the unexpected words the cowboy had just spoken. "My girls need a mother." The sentence echoed in her mind. She looked at the man standing in front of her, studying his face for any sign that he might be joking, but there was no humor in his eyes. Instead, there was something far more serious, quiet sincerity mixed with the kind of loneliness that only someone who had lost deeply could carry. Emily tightened her grip on the handle of her worn suitcase. She had arrived in Willow Creek hoping only to find work, maybe as a seamstress or housekeeper. She had not expected a stranger to offer something that sounded almost like a new life. Daniel Hayes shifted slightly, realizing how strange his words must have sounded. He wasn't a man used to long conversations, especially with strangers. Life on the ranch had taught him to speak only when necessary. For 2 years he had managed the ranch and raised his daughters alone. But watching Emily sitting on that bench had stirred something in him, a memory of the same helpless feeling he had experienced when his wife died. No one should have to face the world completely alone. The twins stepped closer to Emily now, their small hands still clasped together. Clara tilted her head slightly, studying the woman's tired face with innocent curiosity. Lucy, the quieter of the two, simply smiled shyly. Emily noticed their soft expressions and felt something warm move through her chest. Children had always been easy for her to talk to, perhaps because they looked at the world with honesty rather than suspicion. She crouched slightly so she could meet their eyes. "Hello," she said gently. "You must be the twins your father mentioned." Clara nodded quickly. "I'm Clara, and this is Lucy." Lucy waved quietly, hiding partly behind her sister. Emily smiled faintly, though the uncertainty in her heart had not faded. She stood again and looked at Daniel. "Sir, I appreciate your kindness, but I'm not sure I understand what you're offering." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "What I meant is, I could use help at the ranch. Cooking, cleaning, keeping an eye on the girls while I work the fields." He paused before adding, "You'd have a place to stay. And fair pay." Emily felt relief and confusion at the same time. The offer made more sense now. It wasn't the strange proposal she had first imagined, but it was still more generosity than she had expected from a town that had barely welcomed her arrival. She looked toward the dusty road leading away from the station. Without money for another train ticket and nowhere to sleep that night, her options were few. After a moment she nodded slowly. "I would be grateful for the work," she said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod in return, clearly relieved that she hadn't refused. He picked up Emily's suitcase before she could protest. "Ranch is about 15 minutes outside town," he said. "Wagon's just over there." The twins immediately began chatting excitedly as they walked toward the wagon park near the edge of the station yard. Clara asked Emily dozens of questions in quick succession: where she had come from, whether she liked horses, and if she knew how to bake apple pie. Lucy mostly listened, occasionally adding a quiet comment. Emily answered as best she could, surprised by how quickly the girls seemed comfortable around her. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with such open warmth. The ride to the ranch was quiet but peaceful. The moon had begun to rise above the distant hills, casting pale light across the open land. Wooden fences stretched across the fields, and a cluster of cattle could be seen grazing in the distance. Emily watched the landscape carefully as the wagon rolled along the dirt road. It was beautiful in a rough, untamed way, but she also understood the hard work required to survive in such a place. Daniel finally spoke after several minutes of silence. "Ranch isn't fancy," he said. "But it's honest work. That's all I'm looking for," Emily replied. When they arrived, Emily saw a modest wooden house standing near a red barn and a water well. Lantern light glowed warmly from the front porch. Daniel helped the girls down from the wagon before carrying Emily's suitcase inside. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and fresh bread, though Emily suspected the bread had probably been baked earlier that morning. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly built for usefulness rather than decoration. "This can be your room," Daniel said, opening the door to a small bedroom near the back of the house. The room held a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out toward the fields. Emily stepped inside slowly, realizing this was the first safe place she had been offered in months. "Thank you," she said sincerely. That night Emily slept more peacefully than she had in a long time. But the following morning would bring new challenges she had not yet imagined. When the sun rose over Willow Creek the next day, word had already begun spreading through town that Daniel Hayes had brought a stranger to his ranch. Frontier towns were not known for keeping secrets, and speculation traveled quickly through the general store and saloon. Some people believed Daniel had simply hired a housekeeper. Others whispered more suspicious rumors. A few claimed he was moving too quickly to replace his late wife. By midday, nearly everyone in Willow Creek had heard about the mysterious woman at Hayes Ranch. Emily, however, was unaware of the growing gossip as she helped the twins prepare breakfast. The girls laughed while she showed them how to knead dough for biscuits. Daniel watched from the doorway for a moment before heading outside to begin the day's work. For the first time in many months, the house sounded alive again. But peace in frontier towns rarely lasted forever. Later that afternoon, a rider approached the ranch gate. The man on horseback was Thomas Briggs, one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the region and a man known for his sharp tongue and suspicious nature. He stopped near the fence and studied the house carefully. Thomas Briggs did not like strangers. And he especially didn't trust the quiet new woman who had suddenly appeared in Daniel Hayes' life. As Emily stepped outside carrying a basket of laundry, she noticed the rider watching from the gate. His cold eyes followed her every movement. In that moment, Emily realized something important. Her new beginning at the Hayes Ranch might not be as peaceful as she had hoped. Because sometimes the greatest challenges didn't come from the past. They came from the people who refused to let you escape it. The quiet morning peace at Hayes Ranch did not last long. By late afternoon, the rider who had been watching the house finally pushed open the wooden ranch gate and rode slowly toward the porch. Emily had just finished hanging the last piece of laundry when she noticed the approaching horse. The man riding it sat tall in the saddle with a confident but cold expression on his face. His coat was expensive compared to most ranchers in the region, and the silver buckle on his belt reflected the sunlight sharply. This was Thomas Briggs, one of the wealthiest landowners around Willow Creek. People in town respected his money, but very few trusted his character. Emily stood still as the horse stopped near the porch. She could feel the man studying her carefully, almost like someone inspecting a suspicious object rather than greeting another human being. Daniel noticed the rider from the barn and walked toward the house, wiping dust from his hands as he approached. His daughters were playing near the fence but quickly ran toward the porch when they saw a stranger arriving. Briggs spoke first. "So the rumors are true," he said in a slow, heavy voice. "You brought a stranger to your ranch." Daniel crossed his arms calmly. "She's helping around the house." Briggs smirked slightly. "That's what folks in town are saying too. But people also say no one knows where she came from." Emily felt her stomach tighten as the man's eyes moved toward her again. She had hoped her past would remain behind her when she stepped off the train in Willow Creek. Unfortunately, frontier towns had a way of pulling secrets into the open. Daniel's voice became firmer. "Her past isn't your concern." Briggs shrugged casually. "Maybe not, but this town doesn't like surprises." The tension hung in the air for several seconds before Briggs turned his horse around and rode back toward the road. As he disappeared beyond the ranch gate, Emily felt a wave of uneasiness settle over her. Daniel noticed the worry in her face. "Don't mind him," he said quietly. "Briggs thinks he owns half this valley." But Emily understood something Daniel had not fully realized yet. Briggs wasn't simply curious, he was suspicious, and suspicious men often searched for answers. Over the next few days, whispers in Willow Creek grew louder. Some townspeople believed Emily had come to take advantage of Daniel's kindness. Others speculated she might be hiding from someone. Only a few people remained neutral. Frontier communities valued trust deeply, and strangers had to earn it slowly. Despite the growing gossip, life at the ranch continued. Emily helped cook meals, repair clothing, and teach the twins simple lessons during the day. Clara and Lucy quickly grew attached to her. They followed her through the house asking endless questions, laughing whenever she tried to braid their hair. Even Daniel began to notice the change in his daughters. Since Emily's arrival, the house had become warmer and more alive than it had been in years. But peace was fragile. One evening, as the sun began setting over the valley, a wagon rolled into the ranch yard. Daniel stepped outside immediately, sensing trouble before the driver even climbed down. The man standing beside the wagon was someone Emily recognized instantly. Her heart nearly stopped. His name was Victor Hale. Victor had once been the man who promised to marry her. Instead, he had abandoned her after losing their farm to gambling debts. Worse still, he had spread lies about her reputation to avoid taking responsibility for the money he owed. Victor removed his hat slowly as he looked toward Emily. "Well now," he said with a crooked smile. "Didn't expect to find you all the way out here." Daniel immediately stepped between them. "You know this man?" Emily nodded slowly, her voice barely steady. "Yes." Victor chuckled lightly. "She didn't tell you about me, did she?" "That's interesting." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Victor leaned against his wagon casually. "I came to collect something." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Victor continued speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She owes money. Her old farm debt didn't just disappear." Daniel turned slightly toward Emily. "Is that true?" Tears formed in her eyes, but she forced herself to answer honestly. "Yes," she said quietly. "But the debt isn't mine. It was his." Victor laughed. "That's not how the paperwork reads." The twins watched the scene silently from the porch, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Daniel looked back toward Victor with a calm but dangerous expression. "Listen carefully," Daniel said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "She works here now. Whatever problems you had before, they end here." Victor's smile slowly faded. "You planning to pay her debts?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "If that's what it takes." Emily turned toward him in shock. "No, you don't have to do that." Daniel shook his head gently. "Sometimes people deserve a second chance," he said. Victor studied Daniel for a long moment before realizing the rancher was not going to back down. Finally, he climbed back onto his wagon. "This isn't over," he muttered before driving away down the road. Silence settled over the ranch again. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks, overwhelmed by the kindness she had just witnessed. For months she had believed the world had completely turned against her. But here, in this quiet place she had arrived by accident, someone had chosen to stand beside her. Later that evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Emily sat on the porch beside Daniel. The stars filled the sky above them like scattered lanterns. "I should leave," she said softly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your ranch." Daniel looked out across the dark fields. "You're not trouble," he replied. Emily hesitated before speaking again. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel took a slow breath. "Because when I lost my wife, people helped me keep going," he said quietly. "Sometimes kindness is the only thing that keeps a person standing." Emily felt tears return to her eyes. After a long silence, Daniel turned toward her. "You once asked what I meant at the station," he said. Emily nodded. Daniel's voice softened. "My girls do need a mother." Emily looked toward the house where Clara and Lucy were sleeping peacefully. Then she smiled through her tears. "I think I might need a family too." Months later, the small church in Willow Creek filled with townspeople who had finally come to respect the quiet strength of the woman who arrived on the train. Clara and Lucy scattered wildflowers along the church aisle while Daniel waited nervously near the front. When Emily stepped inside wearing a simple white dress, the entire room seemed to brighten. Because sometimes the greatest journeys begin not with certainty, but with a stranger offering a place to belong. And at the very station where Emily once stood alone with nothing but a suitcase, she had found something far more valuable: a home, a family, and a love she never expected.